Welcome everyone to this event. My name is Dr. Devika Dutt. I'm a lecturer in the Department of International Development, and welcome to the first seminar of our Interrogating Development seminar series in collaboration with this Except Palestine seminar series, I guess. So the Interrogating Development seminar series is first seminar for the new term, for new year, whatever you want to call it. So in this seminar series, we typically organize public talks on new and important books, research in the field of development. Essentially, we want, as a Department of International Development, we want to have conversations around development that aren't necessarily limited to textbooks. And we usually have talks around new books. We often have panels with policymakers sometimes. Still working on making that happen again. But as I said, I'm delighted to welcome you all to this event today. This is, since the time I started organizing this seminar series, which was 1.5 years ago, this is possibly the biggest seminar we've organized, so I'm very happy to see that. Of course, I cannot take full credit for it as much as I want to. I must give a nod to the KCL Palestine Collective. A lot of them are here. You can see. Thank you. So they're the ones who are wearing these, and some of us are not wearing anything, but they've been like, this event has been a huge team effort, and I'm very glad that we could make it happen. So the context and the theme of this event, and Except Palestine, is on conflict, development, and de-development. Of course, this is not a new one, especially in the context of Palestine, and I'm sure our eminent panel of speakers will highlight that, but it's been one that's been ongoing for decades. Of course, as the Department of International Development, we would be remiss if we did not host a conversation about conflict, development, and de-development in the context of the ongoing genocide in Palestine. Of course, my delight is tempered by the situation and in Palestine, and our eminent panel of speakers will talk about it in many multifaceted ways. So I'm going to stop talking now. I'm going to hand it over to my esteemed colleague, Dr. Rafeef Ziada.
Thank you, and a warm welcome to all of you to this important event. I can't tell you how incredible it is to see so many of you here. This event has been a long time in the making. We started in November wanting to hold a talk on Palestine, and it has finally happened. I want to thank my colleagues from the Department of International Development for being heroic in ushering it through and for volunteering tonight to also make it happen. Except Palestine is a series of town halls that's taking place at universities across the UK. Its purpose is to emphasize, think through, and reject the exceptionalization of Palestine, to refuse the silencing, intimidation, and Kafkaesque framing of Palestine's ongoing Nakba. We are proud to host the third iteration at the International Development Department at KCL as part of the Interrogating Development series. Except Palestine was first held with a panel of 8 speakers to a packed room at the London School of Economics. This is the last time they're going to beat us to it. It has since traveled to SOAS and now King's College London. There's 2 more planned events at UCL and City. The purpose of Except Palestine is to emphasize the way that discussions of Palestine are systematically excised from our classrooms, our universities, and our public debate, because it is categorically labeled as criminal. And it is to think with this curiosity, this universal excising, to unpack it, to chart, to attempt to think, why is it Palestine that gets removed and Palestinians that are removed from land as a people? What are the politics of this excising? And what is our shared condition when it happens? The particular censoring of Palestine tells us that there is something paradigmatic about Palestine. The uniqueness of how Palestine is treated tells us that Palestine is universal, tells us all about our world here, that there are forms to fill and risk assessments everywhere that we need to get through to be able to speak about Palestine. Each Except Palestine event retains a commitment to refusing this erasure. Palestine, in each iteration, has a different focus. Tonight, we will be focusing on development and de-development. On December 29th, the International Court of Justice announced South Africa's application against Israel, citing Genocide Convention violations concerning Palestinians in Gaza. In the first hearing on January 11th, the Council for South Africa concluded with saying, this is a population, the Gazan population, is a population that Israel had already made vulnerable through 16 years of military blockade and crippling de-development. And in moments like this, I think it's crucial to reflect on this and what truly matters when we speak about development and say that we are scholars and students of international development. In studying international development, we are encouraged to think and understand the world around us and how it operates. In times marked by a seemingly perpetual lurch from one crisis to another, where we feel there's no stable ground beneath us between the climate crisis, COVID-19, cost of living, global inequality, there is an urgency to think about what we call development. We need to be probing and challenging ourselves to think about what has become development practice and discourse. Walter Rodney's insight in how Europe underdeveloped Africa here remains extremely relevant, stressing that development and underdevelopment are not comparative terms, but also have a dialectical relationship. In other words, some places develop because they de-develop others. Some populations are more prosperous, not because they are inherently better, stronger, more democratic, but because there are histories and relations of power, colonialism, and plunder. Unfortunately, the prevailing perspective on development often divorces itself from these power dynamics and histories of colonialism. Advocates see development as a neutral technocratic process, relying on financial aid and state-building policies, good governance, and a host of other buzzwords that I'm sure you're all familiar with. However, when we abstract development from power and historical injustice, we perpetuate violence. When development is reduced to technocratic jargon about empowerment, we fall short. As students and scholars of development, we must think beyond conventional boxes, frameworks, and the next available internship if we truly want to address the world around us today. And it is striking how underdevelopment, de-development, militarism, and human rights crystallize in a place like Gaza, under military occupation since 1967. Its population, mostly refugees from 1948, living under siege for 17 years. People living on the brink of life in a siege where the Israeli government has calculated the number of calories people consume. However, the world only takes notice as the bombs drop, naming it a crisis, but the slow violence that persists constantly is normalized. People say it's the most aid-dependent region in the world. People say Gaza is the most densely populated area in the world and repeat these things like mantras without the historical context that made it so. So today, we want to speak about historical context. When we ignore history, we also perpetuate violence. We also fall short. Tonight, we have a brilliant panel of speakers to help us think about these questions and the current situation from different perspectives. I will go ahead in the order that our speakers will speak. We will start off with Professor Niamh Gordon, who's a human rights professor of human rights law at Queen Mary University of London and the chair of the British Society for Middle East Studies, which have done incredible work around academic freedom and the question of Palestine. Dr. Yasmin Gunaratnam is a professor of social justice in King's College London School of Education, Communication and Society. She's interested in how different types of inequality and injustice are produced, lived with, and remade, and how these processes create new forms of local and global inclusion and dispossession. We are very proud to have with us also Dr. Danish Mustafa, who is a professor in critical geography in the King's College London Geography Department. His research interests have been in water resources, geography, environmental hazards, development, and critical geographies of violence and terror. And finally, I want to thank Professor Lale Khalili, who's joining us online tonight because she is in Exeter, who is a professor of Gulf Studies at the University of Exeter. Her writing has examined the representations and practices of violence, including in her first two books, Heroes and Martyrs of Palestine, The Politics of National Commemoration, and Time in the Shadows, Confinement and Counterinsurgency. I want to thank our speakers profusely because this is a very busy time of the term. People are teaching nonstop. I know that Professor Gordon has come after about 6 hours of teaching, maybe. So we are a little bit tired, but we thought it was critically important that we open up this conversation, that we hold this event. So again, thank you all very much for being here, and we will leave it with Professor Gordon. The mic is yours.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Rafif and the Palestine Committee, you call it here? The Palestine Committee for organizing the event. And I'll speak about two things. I want to speak about de-development, and I want to speak about silencing. And I'm going to be just descriptive, less analytical. But even before I begin, I'd like to say that as the Palestine Committee was organizing this event, they had to overcome, from what I hear, I don't know the details, many hurdles. And so when I walked into the room and I asked what's going on and why was there such kind of pararam around all this just a panel on Palestine, someone said to me they were afraid that students would protest. Now, I thought the whole idea of a university is knowledge and civic education, and I thought that protest is like the basis of civic education. And if a university is afraid of protest, then we have a problem. And we'll discuss that. We'll see when I talk about silencing. So I'll begin. One thing we have been noticing over the past 3 months, the 3.5 months, is the systematic destruction of schools and university buildings, including laboratories, libraries, classrooms. And this, of course, comes alongside the killing and injuring of students and staff. The education system in Gaza is made up of over 625,000 students and about 22,500 teachers and professors, all whom been impacted by the war. As documented by the Palestinian Ministry of Education and the European Mediterranean Human Rights Monitor, since the beginning of the war, almost 4,500 students have been killed and close to 8,000 have been injured, including close to 250 teachers and administrators, and about 800 of them have been injured. The Israeli army has also killed about 100 university professors, and the number of students and educational staff killed in such a short period is unprecedented in the region's history. The destruction of the educational infrastructures is also unprecedented. During the war's first 16 weeks, 345 out of Gaza's 737 schools were either destroyed or damaged, and about 30% of the school buildings will be out of service even after a ceasefire is implemented. Consequently, hundreds of thousands of school children who have already been deprived of education for several months will not have a school to return to once the Israeli forces' attacks subside. Higher education infrastructures have also been heavily targeted. Israel has systematically destroyed or damaged every university in the Gaza Strip. The Islamic University and University College of Applied Sciences were bombed in October. Al-Azhar University, the second largest university in Gaza, and Al-Quds University were bombed in November. In December, Al-Aqsa University and the Palestine Technical College were severely damaged, And this month, Israel circulated images of the controlled detonation of Isra University, the last remaining major university in the Gaza Strip. Alongside the wholesale decimation of the physical infrastructure of higher education, including, for example, the looting of 3,000 rare artifacts by Israeli soldiers who occupied Isra University before they demolished it, Israeli forces have killed many members of the Gaza academic community, including numerous internationally respected scholars who comprise part of the region's intellectual leadership. The systematic targeting of the Palestinian education system is a war crime and a crime against humanity, and appears to be an integral part of the broader pattern of elimination emphasized in South Africa's application to the International Court of Justice. The destruction of education is indeed part of a genocidal strategy aimed at destroying in whole or in part Palestinian society in the Gaza Strip. In light of this, of all of this massive de-development of a society, we would have expected the British government, and particularly the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State for Education, to publicly condemn the destruction of the education system in the Gaza Strip, underscoring the horrific long-term effects this destruction will have on Palestinian society. But what about our university leaders? Imagine for a moment a situation where all universities in the UK were bombed. Would the university leaders in the UK expect a modicum of solidarity or empathy for their counterparts overseas? Has any university leader in the UK condemned the wholesale destruction of higher education in the Gaza Strip? Has any VC even expressed some empathy towards Palestinian students and staff in Gaza? From where I stand, it seems that the majority of university leaders in the UK have not even expressed empathy towards their own Palestinian students and staff, let alone those in Gaza. All of which brings me to the UK and the attacks on academic freedom here. The main challenges in the UK, the main ones, are not legal challenges. They're primarily a result of the ongoing efforts by politicians, government bodies, media outlets, corporate bodies, civil society organizations, universities, and individuals to silence lawful speech pertaining to the situation in Israel-Palestine. The different types of complaints involving breaches to academic freedom that have been received by the British Society for Middle Eastern Studies since October 7th, 2023, suggest that the silence has multiple layers and operates in numerous ways, but primarily through creating a chilling effect. The efforts to chill speech on Israel-Palestine manifest themselves through numerous capillary interactions within higher education institutions. Indeed, many of the censoring acts operate under the radar and to some might appear innocuous. For example, a head of a department calls in a staff member for a conversation and recommends to the staff member's own good, quote unquote, that they be careful voicing their views on Palestine. The university's social media and press offices stop sharing news articles that are either written or cite staff members who voice opinions that are considered controversial, such as the support of the right of Palestinians to self-determination. Staff members or students are asked to remove a Palestinian flag from an office door or a dorm room. Of course, none of these little interventions occurred when the Ukrainian-Russian war erupted. Staff members were not called in and asked to be careful. The press office did not suppress our speech, and I do not recall administrators asking to remove a flag. Other forms of silencing involve the deplatforming of events organized on campuses. Deplatforming can be carried out by demanding that organizers pay security costs for an event, which can readily reach thousands of pounds and exceed the organizer's budget. All the examples I'm giving are from complaints we received, okay? Insisting that an event on Palestine needs to be balanced despite the same university placing no such stipulation on other topics, such as Ukraine-Russia war, or when critical gender scholars are invited to panels. Preventing protests or sit-ins calling, for example, for the implementation of a ceasefire in Gaza, often citing unspecified safety concerns for the student body for doing so. Canceling events discussing the situation in Palestine due to the organizers due to the fact that the organizer included an emoji of a watermelon on the poster inviting the people. Procedure issues such as a failure to submit all the necessary paperwork by a certain date. A topic being too sensitive at a given moment, as when Liverpool Hope University cancelled the lecture of Avi Schlein, a fellow in the British Academy. Brismas has also received complaints of corporate actors participating in deplatforming, such as when Eventbrite removed from its platforms an event on November 7th, 2023, in which Omar Barghouti of Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions Movement was scheduled to deliver at Queen Mary University of London. Other instances of silencing manifest themselves through the lack of institutional support for lecturers who teach on Israel-Palestine. About 120 UK universities have adopted the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which conflates anti-Zionism and criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. As a result of that, lecturers, for example, use the Amnesty International report that charges Israel of carrying out the crime of apartheid in their modules may, according to the IHR definition, be accused of being anti-Semitic. We have received complaints of modules being canceled since lecturers did not receive institutional guarantees that they can use such materials in class and be protected if complaints are filed. Should I continue or 2 more minutes? In addition, UK universities have suspended staff members and students in response to complaints made against their social media postings. Here we have come across numerous cases where social media accounts of individuals are mined, either by students or actors external to the university. These actors examine posts, likes, shares of students and staff over long periods, so in some cases exceeding a decade, in some cases when the student was 14 years old. Following October 7th, Brismas has received numerous complaints from students and staff, some of which have been detained for posting content on social media and suspended from universities. And when I say detained, a complaint will be filed, let's say, on October 10th or 17th, but the university will appear 2 months later, 12 policemen at 5:30 in the morning to the apartment of the staff member as if, I don't know, they have a bomb in their house. If it was so urgent, you don't need to wait 2 months to come to their house, and why come at 5:30 in the morning? I have about 2 more pages, outlining the kinds of censorship and clampdown we have been witnessing in higher education in the UK. And I haven't discussed the kind of UCRI case and all that, but I will conclude by saying that for the destruction in Gaza to continue unabated, they need to shut us up. And our responsibility, in turn, is to push back. We must push back despite their endless efforts to shut us up and pledge that we, students and staff from all walks of life, both individually and as groups, will not remain silent. Thank you.
take a deep breath. So I'm really humbled to see so many people who've come out tonight. And I think that says something about the expulsion of critical spaces for thinking and dialogue from the university, that we need these spaces now more than ever. So I'm full of gratitude to you. I'm also very grateful there has been a whole collective of care, an undercommons. It's ridiculous that care should be relegated to the undercommons, who managed to put this event together, and it was like an endurance test. So thank you to everybody who's helped, Sarah and Rafif particularly, but we have ushers, people who had to do fire marshal training at the last minute, and lots of other bureaucratic hoops. So the fact that we're here is a real feat that I'm truly appreciative of. So let me just also check my time. So for context, I'm a medical sociologist and I work in the fields of end-of-life care and palliative care. So palliative care is most often associated with hospices in Europe. And it's a speciality really that I'm going to say something more about, but that I see spreading in different ways. What it's important to know, I guess, is that the word palliative, it's quite unusual, but it's said to derive from the Latin word pallium, which means to cloak or to shield. So just remember that. I mean, it feels obvious to say that we're living through the world's most audiovisual and real-time genocide. And for me, as I imagine for you, there are sights and sounds that aren't easily bracketed out, that set in train a kind of churning, nauseous disbelief, sorrow, mourning and rage. And these are felt but not necessarily always known. And some of these presences, these voices, these images have shaped and accompany me in what I'm going to say today. So I mention them here as an effective and ethical compass and touchstone. So come with me. There is Khalid Naban, cradling, kissing, and trying to open the eyes of his lifeless granddaughter, 3-year-old Reem. Soul of my soul, my heart, my 2 eyes. Days after he had buried Reem and her brother Tariq, I see footage of Khalid moving between injured people, comforting them and triaging them. Then there's Rifat Alaria's poem, If I Might Die. I watch it being translated so quickly and tenderly on social media into many different languages. Someone observes that this labor, this work of love, reminds them of the AIDS memorial quilt. And then yesterday, the footage of Israeli special forces dressed as doctors and civilians, carrying weapons, some of them in a baby carrier, fitted with silencers, their guns assassinate 3 Palestinian men in their hospital beds. A sight and a knowledge somehow all the more repugnant for being in a hospital somehow, because of the breaching of humanitarian law, but also those perverse inversions of the Israeli rationale used to bomb and destroy hospitals in Gaza. But also, I think what really got under my skin was the making palpable of the increasing intimacy of Israeli terrorism. This is the stealthy, quieter other of the bombs and missiles that obliterate, slaughter and maim, often indiscriminately and at a distance. So there's something about the pace, the metrics of pace and intimacy of violence that I'm getting at, which has also been a theme in anti-colonial disability thinking. So you might know of the scholar Jasbir Puer, whose work on debility is about the slow-moving debilitation of Palestinians in Gaza. And for me, this slow-paced violence has been really something I've been thinking and working on for a long time. and Jasbir Puar calls this the right to maim. And it includes not only the injuring of bodies, but also crucial infrastructure. So infrastructure is really systems of life support. So this is work that's done by the geographer Jaberi Salamanca particularly. So this is the destruction of roads, schools and universities, hospitals and ambulances, for example. And facts and numbers seem really important. So just to touch on these. On the 16th of December, the UN reported that since the 7th of October, at least 300 healthcare workers have been reported killed. This is more than the total number of healthcare worker deaths recorded across all countries in conflict last year and in any single year since 2016. More than 10 children on average have lost one or both of their legs every day, every single day in Gaza since October the 7th, with many amputations performed without anesthesia. Statistic from Save the Children. UNICEF projects that in the next few weeks, child wasting, and that's the most threatening form of malnutrition in children, could increase from pre-crisis conditions by nearly 30%, affecting up to 10,000 children in Gaza. That was reported on the 15th of January. Emily Callahan, a nurse with Doctors Without Borders, told a CNN reporter in an interview that a camp that she was working at, where over 50,000 people were, has just 4 toilets, and they get water supply for 4 hours a day. 4 toilets for 50,000 people at a time where water is also contaminated. So there's diarrhea and waterborne diseases are also increasing. But I want to say that this health crisis is something that's being more visibilized now. And this is against a bigger context. So 90% of water from Gaza's sole aquifer is unfit for human consumption. When I was doing research on COVID in 2020, I found there were just 65 ventilators in the Gaza Strip for a population of which was then close to 2 million people. Cancer is the second leading cause of health after cardiovascular disease, and there's some very rare types of cancer which relate to some of the polluting effects of different forms of settler colonial violence. So to begin from here is to say something about how crucial care and health have been to this new phase of Israel's genocidal violence. So it's new, it's not something that's completely started from October the 7th. So the point I guess I want to make is that while processes of care and health and bodies are being rearranged, so is anti-colonial struggle. So even the most basic rudimentary care, as Fanon taught us, is anti-colonial resistance. This is why for the colonizers, I think, hospitals and care are such a threat, why they indeed can be a form of terrorism. In an interview earlier this month, the British Palestinian plastic surgeon Ghassan Sabu Sitar described to Haj Bahar how triaging patients in Gaza for surgery has changed. It's now not so much medically determined, but they look at what is happening in the family. And specifically what he said was they think about, is this the last child that will be left for his or her mother? And Bahar writes, I found this extremely important because it's a point that transformed the practice of surgery from a relation between a surgeon and a repairing of an individual body into a relation between the surgeon and the repairing of social relations. If the aim of genocidal violence is not only the destruction of individual bodies, but the destruction of networks of social relations and their capacity to reproduce themselves, surgical practices, by aiming to save or repair family and communal rather than just individual bodies in the way it is described, acquire an an important anti-genocidal dimension. I've got a few minutes left. So I'm fairly sure that there were never explosives or Hamas command centres in Gazan hospitals, but I can see and I can feel how for the Israeli state their very existence is terrorising. It also feels really significant, doesn't it, that on the day after the ICJ interim ruling, that the US and the UK, among several other countries, suspended their funding of UNRWA due to unproven allegations about 12 or 0.04% of their staff. So I think debilitation as a de-development, as an intimate de-development, is now being brought into the arsenal of collective punishment, but also the extension of global North imperialism. So I'm going to finish up by, again, I've got a couple of pages to get a page to go, but I want to say, so what I've really been describing is that Gaza is often talked about as being an open-air prison and a concentration camp. But what I see is how Gaza has been turned into a hospice, a mortuary, and a cemetery. I also see the proliferation of palliative carers that include journalists, the children collecting fragments of severed body parts for burial, the poets. And yeah, I think I'll just stop there, but the point I was going to make as well is that the intimacy of the violence, the getting under the skin and into the body, as this slow-moving violence that has been happening for years, is also now becoming much more visible and spectacularized by bombs. So this is what, in work with Nigel Clark, a geographer, we're calling explosive whiteness.
Thank you very much. Gosh, I feel like curling up under the table and not really talking. But I think that I was going to talk about the slow violence with regard to water, but I'd just like to comment on some of Professor Gunaratnam's points about terrorism. I also teach a module in critical geographies of terrorism, and the way we sort of define terrorism in there and geographically is spectacular violence directed towards place destruction or place alienation. So when the Israeli special forces went into that hospital, they had to have known that there is CCTV there. The destruction and the bombing and everything that is going on, they know that it is being transmitted all over the world. Everything that Israel is doing is they know that it is well known and that it is spectacular. And they know that no one's going to care, or certainly not 90% of the world is going to care, but the imperialist elites of the West are not going to care. And the fight of the Palestinians is not against the Israelis. The fight of the Palestinians is not against the Israeli Zionist state, it's against the imperialist West. And Israel is an extension of it. And sooner they make their peace with that reality, in fact, they know that reality, it's just that we need to make peace with that reality, that there is an anti-imperialist West right here, and there's an imperialist West. It's a struggle in which this solidarity between us is the story. It's not a religious conflict, it never was. It was always a colonial imperialist conflict. So that spectacular violence, which brings in sanctions against UNRWA, which brings in silence from the rest of the world. Every violation of international laws of war are being, and by the way, is it even a war? I mean, how do you have a war against an occupied population? War is first of all illegal. Second of all, it is between states. And how do you have a war against a population? But let's not go there. The point is that it is an imperialist thing. But that said, let's get back to issues of development. There's SDGs, which have been criticized all over the world by many critical thinkers as a universalist, another imposition from top down over the rest of the world. Fine. I'm not going to be an insufferable academic and start getting into why they're rubbish. Important thing is that they reflect a certain global consensus on what should happen. So what to do about it. So I made up this thing, you know, one of the ways that you could pull it together. There are infinite number of ways in which you could pull together SDGs. But looked at the literature and thought about, you know, which might be a good point of entry over here. And this diagram is kind of a representation of that. And the argument here very simply is that if you start with clean water and sanitation, imagine good health and well-being. Without that, it's not going to happen. Good health and well-being, quality education. 90% of the reasons why children are not able to go to school in the global south is because of increased mobility in the household or not being able to afford it because of mobility in the household. You can follow the line of reasoning right there with gender equality and responsible production and consumption in the middle. Fine. Here's a particular schema over here. Point is, without water supply, decent water supply and sanitation, a society for SDGs is not going anywhere. SDGs are supposed to apply everywhere, of course, except Palestine, naturally. WHO asks for 100 liters of water per day. West Bank gets 80 liters of water per day. Israel gets 300 liters of water per day and has always had. These days, Gaza is getting 2 to 3 liters per person per day. When you flush your toilet, you get 6 liters of water. You use 6 liters of water. Every time you shower, you use 10 liters of water per minute, right? That's the amount of water that's going in there. Now, I know a little bit more about West Bank, much more so than Gaza. Gaza is a simple case of the groundwater-dependent kind of a society where almost all of the water is siphoned off by Israel. They have to depend upon desalination. Desalination depends upon fuel. Desalination depends upon infrastructure, which has been destroyed in this particular instance. And whatever has not been destroyed cannot get fuel because the fuel is not allowed in through Rafah. And even when the fuel is allowed, because all the roads have been destroyed, the fuel can't get to where it's needed. So desalination is out of the picture there. But the important and the fascinating thing is that within hydrology, we have a few principles, which are science-based, which apply everywhere, except Palestine. Give you some examples. 80 to 90%, there are two major aquifers in Israel, if you imagine. There's the coastal aquifer, and then there's the mountain aquifer. The mountain aquifer, territorially, about 70 to 80% of it lies under the West Bank, which is not, according to international law or any law you care to name, not Israeli territory. So, and 80 to 90% of its recharge comes from the West Bank. However, 87% of that water goes to Israel proper, and 13% goes to West Bank. One of the things about getting old is that you keep forgetting which classes you're supposed to. Now I can see my notes. I was like, why can't I see my notes? Now I can. Now, one of the traditional things in the Levant regarding water use and water collection has historically always been, for thousands of years, of cisterns for collecting rain, because in the Mediterranean region, you get rain in a particular time of the year, and you collect it. Those are routinely destroyed by Israeli defense forces, saying that they're illegal. It is a thousands of year old tradition of cisterns which are destroyed. Now, 270 water and sanitation facilities within Area C, which is supposed to be under Israeli occupation most of the times in West Bank, have been destroyed by the Israeli defense forces, describing them as illegal. The fascinating thing is, I learned in mathematics, negative plus negative is a positive, right? So how does an illegal thing declare something illegal to, it doesn't make sense. Either way, so that's that. Now, Oslo Accord said that there will be equitable distribution of water resources between the Palestinian Authority and Israel. Now, it is obviously not equitable if Israel is appropriating 87% of the water of the aquifer. Israel says that prior use, which is the second principle of the Helsinki Accord, prior use is what matters, not so much the equitable distribution. No, prior use obviously is undertaken by Israel through pumping. Prior to 1967, Falahin were using water through springs, if you will. Israel brings in its extractivist ethos of water use, put in high-powered pump them out, and the whole world is enthralled. Oh, look at Israeli water management model. Look at what geniuses they are. Look at how they have turned the desert to, have made the desert to bloom. I was in Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and they said, oh, you're from Pakistan. It's like, yeah, actually, I am. How'd you get in here? Well, you let me in, so I don't know. So, why don't you use drip irrigation? Why don't you, we've got a lot to teach you. I was like, yeah, you got the most stupidest, rubbish, idiotic water management paradigm in the world that, by the way, every surrounding country is enthralled by, as is the West. Why? How can you say that? What nonsense? I was like, agriculture is not magic. It's basically energy in, energy out. You put in 14 calories of energy to extract 1 calorie of biomass. The falahin, the traditional farmer, puts in 1 calorie of energy, and with his brawn, with his labor, and using the metabolism of the earth, extracts 1.5 calorie of energy. One guy is a primitive idiot, and the other one is a genius. Take your pick. Now, this is not necessarily specific to Israel. This is the standard imperialist, colonialist mindset regarding resources out there. So the idea is that Palestinians, when spring goes dry, I've worked on springs in South Asia mostly, but I've also worked on springs in Jordan. And I know that a spring is not like a tap. No one falls in love with their tap, right? I mean, it's a bloody tap. You turn it, either it works or it doesn't work. But a spring in any sort of a traditional society is a place of enchantment. It's a place of romance. It's a place of memory. It's a place of identity. It's a place of sociability. Every time a spring goes, a universe that is around that spring goes. That's because Palestinians have a memory. Palestinians have a continuous association with those water resources. I don't want to call them resources. I hate water resources. I mean water in all of its different manifestations. And then along comes this primarily European Zionist movement, which replicates an extractivist ethos in that particular landscape and declares itself geniuses, and the rest of them a bunch of imposters. Now, last thing, how am I doing on time? 2 minutes, okay. So the last thing I want to talk about is the remarkable thing is, according to the standard rules of hydrology everywhere else in the world, a river basin is an integrated whole. With more knowledge of groundwater, surface water interactions, we know that we tend to consider groundwater feedback into the surface water and surface water feedback into the groundwater as an integrated whole. Anywhere else in the world, whichever river system you're managing, you talk about it as a whole. UN Economic Commission for West Asia came up with a 600-page inventory of water resources in West Asia. And they divided Jordan River Basin into headwaters, upper basin, lower basin, and the Yarmouk River Basin. And all four have no connection to each other. The laws of hydrology have been thrown out the window. And this is United Nations doing it. I mean, I'm not even going to get in. The reason being that in the lower basin is the Palestinian territories. And they want to say that there is only 20 million cubic meters of water available in the lower basin. That's all you got to deal with. Well, what about the upper basin? What about Yarmouk? What about the entirety of the Jordan River Basin? Well, no, but that's different. You know, that's not hydrologically the same. How can it hydrologically not be the same? There's water up there, water is down here, that water is coming down here, and somehow the water up there is mine, and the water down here is mine as well, by the way, but you can have some of it. Bizarre. The rules of hydrology don't work. Are applicable to everyone except Palestine. So, the general idea is that Palestinians have no future in the land they live on. It's a land, always the conversation is around land. But I think a lot of Israeli water managers learn it's more about water. And the water part of it, water is life, water is aesthetics, water is identity, water is stories, water is culture, water is so many things. And it is all of those things to Israel, to Palestinians. So when you're talking about water coming in as a trickle into the Dead Sea and Dead Sea disappearing, oh, the Palestinians are polluting it. Wait a minute, mate. Pollution doesn't mean anything unless we are talking about the mixing of it, unless we're talking about dilution of it. If you don't give them any water, of course it's going to be polluted. Yours is more polluted, mind you. Your settlements produce more pollution. You just give them more water to dilute that. Simple story is that. But those basic principles of water and physics are suspended in case of Palestine. So the idea is that Palestinians have no future where they are. And that's the story that has been hammered into the head through water, through land, through violence, through what have you want to talk about, over the past 50 years. That story will not be tolerated by for anyone else except Palestine.
Lale, you're up.
Okay, shall I begin?
Yes.
So one of the lovely things about being in a Middle East Studies department, which is where I am at Exeter, is that when I'm teaching a social science class, I can actually get my students to read poetry because it's, you're allowed to do that. So after this wonderful set of talks, and I just now learned so much as well about the water usage. I do have to say that this morning, or this afternoon, no, it was this morning, I asked my students to bring some Palestinian poems to class. And Rafif, one of them brought your We Teach Life, Sir, and played it for us. And we were talking about it afterwards. And I said, oh, when is that from? 2008, 2014? And somebody said, no, it's from 2011. And I sat there and I thought, that little exchange was absolutely horrendous. The fact that there's a repetition in here is part of what I want to talk about tonight. The talk that I'm going to read, in part because, like Niamh, I also had a day of teaching for about 6 hours, and so I'm slightly incoherent. The talk that I'm about to read was actually written in 2014. I have only changed one word in it, and that is the word decimation, which means 10% of a place is destroyed. I've just changed it to destruction, which means utter destruction. So I shall begin. The devastation to which Gaza has been subjected in the last few months, seems to be yet another repetition of Israeli settler colonial apparatus' habit of destruction. Gaza has become emblematic of this habit because in recent years, it has so frequently been subjected to bombing while under a state of siege. But like all settler colonialisms, the violence of the state is rooted not in an episodic cycle of violence, but in the very ideology and practice of the settler colonial movement. The zero-sum struggle over the control of the land, whether as nationalist symbol, state territory, capitalist agricultural resource, or as Danish just told us, as the headlands of water, as springs, as the places we remember, is not just the fundamental basis of Israeli settler colonialism, but that of all settler colonialisms, with exploitation of indigenous labor forces appearing as an additional feature at some times and in some places. Such an indigenous population has to be brought to heel or else expelled. An oscillation between policies of subjugation and moments of expulsion, and often both simultaneously, though in different locales, has characterized Israeli violence towards Palestinians since the state's very inception. Both in implementing policies of subjugation and policies of expulsion, the Israeli political military apparatus has deployed the whole range of means, from administrative to military, in doing this. Expulsion of the great majority of the Palestinian population in 1948 and again in 1967 has produced large populations of refugees and refugee camps in the neighboring states, as well as in West Bank and Gaza, themselves targets of military violence by Israel, Israel's local allies, and other reactionary forces in the region. The Palestinian population who remained behind in 1948 has also been subjected to curfews, administrative detentions, closures, and violence in varying intensities over the last 76 years. The policies that effectively entailed the expulsion of Palestinians, especially through the revocation of Palestinians' Jerusalem residency cards, continue apace, even when there are no ongoing military operations. The extent of violence in Gaza in the last 3.5 months, however, and this 3.5 months is also a change, outstripped all previous instances. If I had used the word decimation, I no longer can do so. Such widespread devastation in Gaza has had three broad military intents: the destruction of Palestinian life-giving and life-sustaining infrastructure, placing lethal pressure specifically on Palestinian civilians to force them to abdicate their support for Hamas, and third, to reinforce the carceral mechanisms that fundamentally underlie Israeli counterinsurgency practices. The assault on Palestinian infrastructure is nothing new. It is partially intended to cripple the Palestinian economy so as to force Palestinians into acquiescence through a policy of impoverishment and abjection. But it is also a clear and historically continuous mode of bringing military pressure to bear. Control or devastation of electricity grids, the destruction of water and sewerage infrastructures, the control over roads and crossing points are all weapons deployed by more powerful forces in asymmetric warfare. Shortly after the occupation of the West Bank, then Israeli Minister of Defense Moshe Dayan was quoted as saying, "If Hebron's electricity grids come from our Israeli central grids, and we're able to pull the plug and thus cut them off, this is clearly better than 1,000 curfews and riot dispersals." Now Gaza's electricity, sewage, and water plants are bombed to smithereens. All of this was written in 2014, where the West Bank is ever so tightly wound in the web of Israeli infrastructural administration. The aim of such control over infrastructure is not only the zero-sum control over resources of living and statehood, although it is that, but also the hugely significant control of civilian populations. The habit of attacking civilians so as to force them to abandon their support for militants or fighters among them is a long-standing tactic of counterinsurgency, not only in Palestine, but elsewhere. Here again, Moshe Dayan, speaking in 1967, is instructive. Let the individual know that he has something to lose. His home can be blown up. His bus license can be taken away. He can be deported from the region. Or to the contrary, he can exist with dignity, make money, exploit other Arabs, and travel in his bus. Ethnic cleansing, capitalism. Those are your two choices. Perhaps among the most frequently used set of practices intended to manage civilians have been the policies of population control put into place through a whole series of different carceral tactics and technologies. We are now familiar with the image of the separation walls in Palestine that eats up Palestinian land and acts as a method of impoverishment, land expropriation, and military control. In addition to the separation barriers that are very familiar in the West Bank, you particularly also have buffer zones, seam zones, or security zones that similarly expand the geographic space in which the Israeli military transforms contact with Palestinians into a deadly encounter. There are death zones also in Gaza where the rules of engagement are changed so as to allow the definition of anybody who comes within that space as a target. There is no doubt that one intention of the Israeli military has been to expand this free fire zone to such an extent that it not only concentrates the population into ever smaller areas, it also limits Gazans' access to the sea and importantly to the maritime gas deposits that lay offshore by shrinking Palestinian maritime access from 20 to 3 nautical miles shortly after gas deposits were discovered at 18 nautical miles offshore. Again, Israeli military and economic agendas seem to converge. Beyond free fire zones, population control has also entailed the scandalous curtailment of access to food for Gazans. This was written in 2014. Here, the Israeli state created lists of food items banned from entry into Gaza. For example, coriander even was banned. But it also controlled the precise volume and caloric contribution of food required to prevent Gazans from starving and allowed just under this amount in, and no more. Ehud Barak's advisor, Dov Weisglass, was quoted as saying, "The idea is to put the Palestinians on a diet, but not to make them die of hunger." Today, they're being famished, forced into starvation. Indeed, now today, it seems that the Palestinians are being made to die of hunger. The lesson of the most recent Israeli assault on Gaza, as in all previous assaults, is that civilians are not collateral or accidental casualties of wars between combatants, but the very object of a settler colonial counterinsurgency. The ultimate desire of such asymmetric warfare is to transform the intransigent population into a malleable mass, a docile subject, and a yielding terrain of domination. Such a population will not have an independent national economy. It will not have spokespersons or artists or writers or poets or students or university professors or doctors or hospitals or football players or universities or schools. It will not have a politic. That ever so frequently the Israeli military plunges Palestinians into conflagrations of lead and steel and concrete dust and destruction is the clearest sign that it has failed at making Palestinians into such a docile population. Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much to our speakers. I'm going to introduce the next bit of this event. I am Sara Marzagora. I'm a lecturer in comparative literature in the Department of Languages, Literatures, and Cultures. Devika mentioned that this event was a team effort, and I would like to stress that this team effort included our students. The support of our... Many of you are here, you know who you are. The support has been absolutely overwhelming. We have received so many requests to help, so many offers to contribute, and at some point there was no more tasks that could be allocated to anybody else. And I just have to say, just thank you, just come, just enjoy, just learn something, just take home something. And offers to help came from all sorts of faculties across campus. Academics want spaces to talk about Palestine on campus. We've heard from them. But today we also tell KCL students want a space to talk about Palestine on campus. So I'm here to introduce some students that will come on stage and will read poems. And some of them will read their own poems that they've written specifically for this event. And some of them have chosen to read poems by poets from Gaza that have been killed by Israeli airstrikes in the last 4 months. The students range from first-year undergraduates to last-year PhD students. And I don't want to speak for them in trying to explain why they will come on stage, but I want to thank them. I will read their names in the order in which they will come on stage. Catherine Kelly, Malak Abdelkhalek, Lima Jabarkhail, Kausar Taylor, Tom Coates, Sam Fisher, Aditi Banerjee, Sami Moriarty, and Hiba Rayan. So here are their words against the Israel genocide. And here is their pushback, to use Neve's word, against the erasure of Palestine from our campuses. Thank you.
I Grant You Refuge by Hiba Abu Nada. 1. I grant you refuge in invocation and prayer. I bless the neighborhood and the minarets to guard them from the rockets. From the moment it is a general's command until it becomes a raid. I grant you and the little ones refuge, the little ones who change the rocket's course before it lands with their smiles. 2. I grant you and the little ones refuge, the little ones now asleep like chicks in a nest. They don't walk in their sleep towards dreams. They know death lurks outside the house. Their mother's tears are now doves following them, trailing behind every coffin. 3. I grant the father refuge, the little one's father who holds the house upright when it tilts after the bombs. He implores the moment of death. Have mercy, spare me a little while. For their sake, I've learned to love my life. Grant them a death as beautiful as they are. 4. I grant you refuge from hurt and death, refuge in the glory of our siege, here in the belly of the whale. Our streets exalt God with every bomb. They pray for the mosques and the houses. And every time the bombing begins in the north, our supplications rise in the south. 5. I grant you refuge from hurt and suffering. With words of sacred scripture, I shield the oranges from the sting of phosphorus and the shades of cloud from the smog. I grant you refuge in knowing that the dust will clear, and they who fell in love and died together will one day laugh.
Not Just Passing by Hiba Abu Nada. Yesterday, a star said to the little light in my heart, we are not just transients passing. Do not die. Beneath this glow, some wanderers go on walking. You were first created out of love, so carry nothing but love to those who are trembling. One day, all gardens sprouted from our names, from what remained of a heart's yearning. And since it came of age, this ancient language has taught us how to heal others with our longing, how to be a heavenly scent, to relax their tightening lungs, a welcome sigh, a gasp of oxygen. Softly, we pass over wounds like purposeful gauze, a hint of relief, an aspirin. Oh, little light in me, don't die, even if all the galaxies of the world close in. Oh, little light in me, say, enter my heart in peace. All of you come in.
Hi, my name's Lima. I'm a social sciences student here at King's. And I got back into art and poetry because of Yasmin. She's actually one of my professors on social justice. And I kind of expressed to her how we're really angered by the censorship that institutions have given us. And our emotions are often seen as irrational, which really annoys me because what's the point of studying this course? What's the point of studying about decolonization and about these scholars like Fanon when we're not even allowed to speak about it? So this is a short poem. It's written in the style of a letter. It's about celebrating indigeneity. So I'm just going to show it quickly here. My friend, Aditi, she drew it, and it's got like olive trees, but then it's got a mandala as well. And this is coming from East and South Asian culture. And what this kind of resembles is kind of you guys coming here today, because we are not all Palestinian by ethnicity. We all have different experiences, and we're from different ethnicities, backgrounds, nationalities, but we're all here today, and we are all Palestinian. And so it's called A Letter to Gaza. Please do not leave us, Gaza. Dear Gaza, I swear on my heart, we have not forgotten you, nor will we ever. You carry a piece and entirely of our hearts wherever we go. You are ours and we are yours. Please do not leave us, Gaza. We need you. Please do not part ways with us, for you will be breaking our fragile hearts. I know that you will no longer have to conquer your every breath mercifully in your parting from us, but we cannot breathe without you. Our hearts are one, our thoughts are one, our fingers are connected to the veins of yours. We are yours as much as you are ours. Please do not leave us, Gaza.
That was really powerful. So I wrote this poem myself, and I don't usually write poetry, but for Palestine, we make an exception. The poem that I wrote is actually called An Angel's Plea. I met a girl on the street, her eyes deep and dark as coal, her smile wide as soul itself. She handed me a letter for me to read. Pay attention and take a seat. Dear humanity, I leave you with a seed. It's 2024. Are you still here? Can you hear me from up there? I watch your protests waving flags of my heart about my body parts that they have taken, and I can't help but love. But it is 75 years past since I saw them tossing back and forth my body, for which land it must go towards. I have had my time, but it's time for you to share. Get organized, there is hope out there. Wake up, can't you see? Her legacy is our reality. I have given you a seed. Will you plant it and grow my olive tree? You have already given me more time and energy simply from this Palestinian poetry. She said, dear humanity, have you seen what's happening over there? Your memory is my lasting legacy. My legacy will you share?
Hello. I will be reading a poem from Palestinian poet Salim al-Nafar called Life. It's quite short, but it's very poignant. Life. Knives might eat what remains of my ribs. Machines might smash what remains of stones. But life is coming, for that is its way, creating life even for us.
Hello. I'm also going to read a poem by Salim al-Nafar, but before that, as we were talking about oppression in the university, I don't know if anybody knows, but this morning, SOAS students were arrested. There's been a protest in Hammersmith outside the police station, so this is a live issue. Every time there are protests in London, there are young people in the city which are arrested, right? And they often don't have any care or support. So if you see anything about arrestee support over the weekend and the coming weekends, please try and be those people that stand outside of the police stations, yeah? Because we do our protests, we go home, and then there's a lot of people, often quite alienated, which have no support when they come out of the prison system. Thank you. This poem is called Departure. Earth is yawning, spreading her wings. Soldiers are babbling, siege coming close. Mirrors will go extinct, soldiers will depart without one word. Thank you.
Very quickly, I also just want to start by thanking Zara and Rafif and all of the organisers who, without whom we wouldn't be here, because they've put in so much work. I wrote this poem in November, and I haven't updated the numbers because I feel like it's important for us to remember that every time we do this, as the months keep passing, the numbers are rising and doubling and tripling. And so it's really important that we remember that these aren't just numbers, these are people. So imagine your home torn, origami walls turned two-dimensional, flattened by carpet bombs. Imagine every neighbor with no shelter to seek safety as they sob. The rubble keeps coming, joy buried, homes lost, lives gone. Imagine every class at every school where you grew up murdered in the same month, and it still wouldn't be enough to add up to the number of children piling up, but they're not done. Now imagine no water, no fuel, no medical aid, no food, no electricity, and no news to show the world your cries for help. Imagine yourself amidst the whole world crumbling. Imagine having to beg the West to say something. And they keep funding the arms used for the airstrikes you're underneath. Almost 4,000 children in a matter of weeks. Under an apartheid regime with the aim to ethnic cleanse. Now, we say their names in the past tense. Slaughtering kids is no accident when in the city under siege. They make up 47%. Imagine having to write your child's name on their leg just to identify them among thousands injured and dead. Imagine hospitals that can't be hospitals because what happens when the place people go when they get hurt becomes just another site of massacre. Imagine this actually happening because, yes, it's been happening, not here in the West where we could only imagine, can't even fathom the extent of the deaths for decades in silence. But the leaders in power just turn their heads, abstain from a vote for ceasefire at the UN and tell the nation again and again they support Israel's right to self-defense. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. This is a poem by Rifat Al-Ariya, who was murdered by an Israeli airstrike on the 7th of December 2023. And we live on. And another day in Gaza, another day in Palestine, a day in prison, and we live on, despite Israel's very much identified flying objects, that we see more than our family and friends. And despite Israel's death sentences like lead, cast upon the head as we sleep, like acid rain, gnawing at our life, clinging to it like a flea to a kitten, and stuffed in our throats. The moment we say Amen to the prayers of old women and men, despite Israel's birds of death, hovering only 2 meters from our breath, from our dreams and prayers, blocking their ways to God. Despite that, we dream and pray, clinging to life even harder every time a dear one's life is forcefully rooted up. We live, we live, we do. And that was written in 2012.
Wow, okay, it's a little scarier on this side of the room. So to conclude the segment of poems, we thought to refer to a poem most of us are familiar with, and that is Dr. Rifat Al-Ariya's If I Must Die, may he rest in peace. But yeah, if I must die, you must live to tell my story, to sell my things, to buy a piece of cloth and some strings, make it white with a long tail, so that a child somewhere in Gaza, while looking heaven in the eye, awaiting his dad who left in a blaze and bid no one farewell, not even to his flesh, not even to himself, sees the kite, my kite you made, flying up above, and thinks for a moment that an angel is there, bringing back love. If I must die, let it bring hope. Let it be a tale. But yeah, thank you guys.
All the pain we've been through is worth it just to see you do your poetry. Students have been very scared the past few months. They've been walking into our offices crying, wondering why they can't speak, why after all the talk of decolonization and Black Lives Matter, it's still so hard for them to be who they are on the campuses, and to see you doing your own poetry and standing here. It's just remarkable. Thank you so much. Because technically the reason we become educators is to help people think critically and to help people find their own voices, not to shut them down. So it's fantastic that we can open up the space for you to feel comfortable enough to share with us. So thank you for that. We do have a question and answer session. I know people are getting tired, so I will not keep it very long, but we thought maybe before we launch into the question and answer session, if people just want to turn around to the person next to them, say hello, figure out who they are and why they are at this event, so everything is just not coming from this side of the room. So say hi, be kind to each other. Good. That's great.
It's not Jewish, it's not just rank imperialism.
Okay, I think it's so nice. The crowd is so chatty. That's wonderful. We have 2 roving mics on the side for questions. Please make sure that if you have a question, that it is in the form of the question. We want everybody to be able to ask their questions and to engage with us. We really want to open up the space for a conversation for everyone. So I will make sure that everybody has the same amount of time to ask a question, that it's not dominated by a single voice. We will have gender and racial parity in the way I ask on the questions, so please bear that in mind as well. And we will collect a set of 3, see how many questions there are, and then move on that way. So just put your hand up if you're ready, if you have a question, and there are 2 roving mics on the side. Questions, students, questions? I see your hand, sir. I'm just waiting to collect a few. All right. We have one over there on the side.
So we've heard an awful lot about this didn't start on October the 7th. And I just wanted to ask if people agree that the genocide, the destruction of a people in whole and in part, didn't start on October 7th.
Thank you. Any other questions? We're taking 3 at a time, so keep your hand up if you would like to ask a question. I'd like to prioritize students if possible. Yes, please.
I guess my main question is, we've all been doing or trying our best to organize and get things moving, but some departments in certain universities tend to be really stuck in their ways and not really acknowledging what's going on. I guess my main question is, beyond kind of finding people that are on the same page within the university, what's really the strategy moving forward so that it's not just about only having the space to do something about it?
Thank you. All right, I'll go to the first hand that was raised.
Thank you all, presenters and students. Very informative, very moving. I chair an organisation called Jewish Network for Palestine, and I just want to pick up the point about silencing, because there are many anti-Zionist Jews and Jewish organisations who do not get a platform, and I think it ties in, especially what's happening in the Labour Party. I think that ties into the point about silencing. Any comments would be welcome. Thanks.
Thank you. We have 3 questions. Does the panel want to come back now or collect a few more?
I just think in terms of people's attention, probably at the time of the day, maybe start with 3 and then...
Yes, yeah, perfect. Did you want to answer any of them? One was about universities. What can we do? And departments.
Yeah, I think we're doing this. This is really an expression of what we're doing. And I think at King's, I was not very hopeful that this would happen. So I think, in fact, for me, what's made a huge difference to me very personally is students standing up and saying things. You know, because I think one of the issues is that we all feel like we're the only one. There's something about the institutional and cultural gaslighting at the moment that we see all around us in terms of the communication, the news coverage, all of that, that starts to make you go a bit crazy. So I think every time somebody stands up and says, actually, you know, why did I come to this university? What's going on here? That is, for me, a sort of a metabolic chain reaction, because somebody then says, okay, I'm not alone. So I think but I do, Farida, I take your point about it's being different in different departments as well. And so one of the things I think, you know, just thinking from Black Studies scholars about the undercommons of the university, universities always have renegades and refugees. And I think it's, you know, finding your people really outside the department maybe.
I want to say that also in the context of King's, we've been organizing a student staff assembly that's having regular meetings through the Palestine Collective. Our UCU branch here, after we've organized, has a very good motion on Palestine. It was kind of the first spaces where we organized and had that motion. So the student staff assembly is open to students and to staff and to the trade unions. And we are organizing regularly. And hopefully some of the future work is going to be around divesting from universities and corporations that are complicit in the genocide. But there's a lot of work to be done. So if you're interested in that work, please do get in touch.
If I may, I wrote an article earlier last month arguing that it didn't start on October 7th. It didn't start in 1948. It kind of started in 1916 with the Balfour Declaration. Zionist movement was moribund. It was gone, finished, done, capuche. And then Balfour comes up with a declaration that there's going to be a homeland, a Jewish homeland there. Point is, and that speaks to your question about strategy, they want you to think of it as a religious conflict, just as they wanted you to think about the Northern Irish conflict as a Catholic-Protestant issue. It's not that. It's a political conflict. It's a decolonial conflict. Today, I'm a member of Jewish Voice for Peace. I'm not Jewish. But I'm a part of it because right-thinking, anti-imperialist people are standing up to the right-wing imperialist, colonialist powers and saying no. And this is a story that has been repeated everywhere. Yes, Palestine is an interesting and a very special case of it, and a very stark case of it, but there's other. So if you frame your question, conversation, argument in that political register, if you will, and it is a political conflict. PLO from day one, PFLP from there on, has been saying that it's not about Jewish and Muslim. It is about anti-colonial right for self-determination for Palestinian Christians, Muslims, and Jews. And I think that that's the sort of thing that they want to occlude. They want to make it into a conversation about brown, swarthy, rapist Palestinian men. They want to make it about Muslim radical weirdos. You remember that Charlie Hebdo thing? That jackass Netanyahu flew in there at the Charlie Hebdo. Oh, freedom of speech. I'm just really worried about, you know, the killing of these comedians. Tragic circumstance. But there he is trying to fan this thing. Don't fall for that bait. And if you keep repeating the political message of it, I think that that would be the best perhaps a strategy, if you will. I don't think we've mentioned religion once over here. We've talked about compassion, we've talked about bigger issues of water and everything, and that's the way forward, to my mind.
Lale, I'm conscious you're with us online. Did you want to come in on any of the questions?
I actually do want to come in on something. I think what we forget is that Palestine is decisive. It is decisive not just in the context of the Middle East, but it is decisive as a kind of a pivot of politics here. I've been teaching in academia in Britain for almost 25 years now. And one of the things that is really striking to me, I was in a departmental meeting today and I said, do you guys know when risk assessments for meetings on Palestine came in? And we all converged. There were loads of people from different universities. It happened during Cast Led. Caste-led was the moment in which risk assessments and onerous room bookings and ridiculous conditions were placed on organizing for Palestinians, around Palestinian issues. I think it's really important to acknowledge that it's not, a lot of this silencing doesn't happen through violent means, although some of the horrific stories that Niamh recounted about police showing up at your door at 5 o'clock in the morning is harrowing. But I just recently was reading Edward Said's After the Last Sky, and ran into, in his inimitably eloquent phrasing, he called it the clinical jargon of pure administration. And that is precisely the kind of silencing processes that are happening around us, that, that they ask us to fill, I don't know, risk assessment forms at Exeter have lines about whether or not there's a danger of radon poisoning. I mean, seriously. And I think that the absurdity, the ridiculousness, the Kafkaesqueness of this process has to be in some ways challenged. And it has to be challenged not just by the people that are organizing for Palestine, and not just by unions, but also by colleagues that are sitting in senates and councils and things like that, because it endangers all of us, and not just those of us who are actually doing some activism. I'll shut up now.
Thank you, Lal. So we have a bit of time for another quick round of 3 questions. If people want to put their hand up, I have someone in the middle, and if you, up there. Maybe speak up.
Is Vase, and I think, yeah. Hi, can everyone hear me? So, yeah, Danish, I think answered my question, but I think it's really pertinent to ask it again in a slightly different context. So I just came across a video in which an IDF soldier was interviewed, and he seemed to be really content with what he was doing, and he quoted Bibi's biblical analogy of people of light versus people of darkness, and being very problematic to say the least. How do you think this religious discourse spin-off affects this genocide in the context in which the Israeli people are apparently sold on the idea that this is in fact a whole thing going on? It's a religious battle on, biblical proportions, and how will it play out in the evangelicals in the US who are supporting it?
Thank you. There's a question on that side.
Hello. So as a King's student, I come across a lot of students who have a wide range of opinions on this topic, and some of the students I come across are for the freedom of Palestine, but then they're also for the two-state solution. And when I discuss them on it, they tell me, well, where do you want everyone to go? So I just wanted to know what your response would be to that specific question.
Thank you. And I think there's a hand right in the last row.
Hi, I'm a student at SOAS, and we've faced a lot of repression recently. During the genocide, we had 7 students that were suspended. And I've also had experiences with my lecturers where I've had to challenge them a lot because of their views and the way they're approaching the topic of genocide and what's going on in Palestine. So I guess my question is, how can we as students challenge our lecturers within the classroom, and how can we educate the masses rather than just mobilizing for protests or talks such as these? How can we start conversations within the classroom?
Thank you. Those are very, very big organizing questions. As always, students ask the best questions. I think maybe let's take one more question from the floor. There's a hand right here.
Is it? Yeah. So I'm a student here at King's as well, and I think we have taken, we being staff and students, we've taken actions in writing letters to KCL specifically and mostly criticizing them taking or maintaining a neutral stance. So my question is more like, how do you view the balance of being able to maintain a neutral stance as an academic institution, but also like taking and actively engaging in a moral stance? Like, where's the balance here?
What was the first one?
Between moral stance and active stance on Palestine, against neutrality, basically. All right, we have a great set of 4 questions already. I bring it back to the panel. All big questions. Who would like to start? I'm hearing amming, but not... Go ahead.
So first, I have to say I don't exactly agree about the religious side. I think it didn't start as a religious conflict, but religion is now entangled in it. And you see it now in Israel's approach. There's a messianism in it. And the people that want to resettle the Gaza Strip, it's part of a messianic movement. And also Hamas is an Islamic movement, and there's a certain entanglement of exactly what Dennis said about the imperial and the settler colonial. But now, and it's not now, it has been for several years that the religion has entered it, and that makes everything much more complex, of course. So, and that, I want to go to where do you want people to go is the question. And I had a conversation last night with a good friend, and he's Israeli Jew like me, and he has very similar opinions to mine. And he says, Niamh, I don't say settler colonialism. I don't use the word colonialism. And I asked him, why don't you use the word colonialism? And he says, because when I talk to Israelis, I don't use these. Because for the Israeli Jew, when you use settler colonialism, the response, the idea that the listener gets is elimination, which is what people are telling you, I think, right? That when you come and criticize, the Israeli Jew considers the elimination that he's doing to be brought upon himself or herself. And that is about the notion that I find very problematic in the liberal imagination of dependence and independence. And the idea is that Israel is now independent and the Palestinians are demanding independence, and if it's in the same place, there's only independence for one group. And so you can either have independence only for one group, and that calls for the elimination of the other group, or you can have a realignment of independence, but to inverse it, okay, that the Palestinians are independent and the Israeli Jews are dependent. Or you could maybe have the two-state solution, which are two independences. Now, you ask, how do we answer that question? For me, independence is a fiction. There's no such thing as independence. We're all interdependent. And the question is not a move from dependence to independence. The question is about the restructuring of interdependence. Israeli Jews and Palestinians will always be interdependent. And the question for me is, what is that interdependence going to look like? Today, it looks like an eliminist strategy, or before that, maybe an apartheid. In any case, it looked like a very violent relation of interdependence, whatever you have it. And so for me, my goal as an Israeli Jew is to change the structure of interdependence into an egalitarian one. And it's not very radical what I'm going to say. A democracy for all its citizens. That's all I want. A democracy for all its citizens. And for that, the Palestinians first need to become citizens, those that are not. And then it has to be a space where we can live together. That is the only future I see. And it's very hard at a moment of genocide, or for a Palestinian, I can see that my positionality in this is very problematic as an Israeli Jew, as a moment of in a moment of genocide. But I see no other future. And I think that is the response. And it's not so radical. No. It's not so radical to say, I want a state that all the people in it are citizens with equal rights. What's so radical about that? That is conceived in Israel today as eliminationist against the Jews. That is something that I would say maybe 1% of Israeli Jews would support. But that is the only way forward for me as an Israeli Jew. And last, I'll say something about SOAS in the lectures. You just have to challenge them. Just continue what you're doing. That's all.
My writing's so terrible, so I hope I can respond to the questions as they were put. So I think it was the first question about a religious discourse spinning off in relation to the genocide, but particularly playing out in the US. I have to mention again the South African case. I mean, again, thinking about the audio-visual effects of that, seeing the South African team with all different ages, all different ethnicities, and every single word mattered. You know, it was so beautifully put and eloquent. But that case, so it was an 85-page document, and I'm not a lawyer, but there seems to me, in terms of the crime of genocide, there's two aspects to it. So one is intent, and the other one is execution. And I think in terms of, you know, discourses and language, that's what we really have to keep linking up. That there's a group, again, in terms of thinking of the activism that's happening, there's a group called Law for Palestine, which has been archiving really meticulously 500 statements that embody the state of Israel's commitment to commit genocide, from the human animals to, you know, there are no civilians in Gaza. So I think we have to actually keep anchoring that back to now that South Africa has gifted us this framework of moral thinking. It was fighting for the soul of the planet, really. And I think Ilan Pape also has observed how the world kind of split in terms of the colonized alignments to global Palestine and global Israel. So I think one of the points for me is to really keep linking it back. So the United Nations resolutions, you know, in terms of apartheid, they gave us leverage, and they gave the US had to be forced into sanctions and boycotting. So I think we have that framework that is not only a legal gift, but also a moral gift that we need to keep coming back to. And just in terms of, I completely know what it's like to be a student in a classroom where you feel, where you're so when I did my degree at the LSE, I was the only student of colour in my whole degree programme. And I think I just became, it's very isolating. And you've got social media now, and I've just been seeing one of the things as well, not just in terms of students, but the amazing education work that's been done by pro-Palestinians of all ethnicities on TikTok is amazing, and on social media. So I think even if you're isolated in your institution or your course, that social media can be really helpful. But yes, challenge when you have the strength to do it. And some days you might, and some days you might not. So just really be gentle with yourself as well. I think there's this expectation that we have to be sort of on it all the time, and actually we need to also take care of ourselves.
pretty much all that I wanted to say has already been said, so I really don't want to take up too much space, but just want to raise one little point. When has empire not mobilized religion in its interest? From 19th century colonialism to contemporary, I mean, in South Africa, the whole story was the God gifted this land to us, and the Zulus and everyone else is a bunch of nonsense. So for it to come to this sort of a head of a religious-based or messianic identity on either side is not a surprise. What is, to my mind, catastrophic and what's going to emerge is, I used to live in Florida on the beach, I live on the beach, and there was this bar I'd go to, and there'd be all of these, Vietnam veterans who would hang out there. And I'd say, hey, what happened to Bill? Oh, his liver gave away. Oh, okay. Yeah. Week later, you go, hey, what happened to Jack? Oh, his liver gave away. There were these people who were snipers, precisely the kind of person that Wase was describing about someone who's very happy with what they're doing. But what it does, we humans have a safety catch, and you can do it under whatever pretext that you want to, but eventually, the catastrophic toll that it takes upon you and your soul, and to these young people, is a price that Israeli society is going to have to pay. The breaking down of the human networks and everything that they're actively trying to do is what's going to happen is probably going to free up young Palestinians from any bonds of restraint whatsoever. I say to people, the most dangerous animal in the world is a human male between the ages of 15 and 25. Leave them out of social control, they can wreak incredible havoc. So have it your way, Israel. If you're going to have thousands of young men and women released from the social networks that put some sort of a stop over their behavior, there's going to be a catastrophe at the end of it. The good news is, on the other hand, mercifully, no one under 35 reads a newspaper, thank God. No one under 35 listens to that nonsense from BBC or Sky News or anything like that. No one does that. Mercifully, you guys listen to TikTok, you go on Twitter, you go to real sources of information. And from there, an altogether new story is being cobbled together. I think the imperialist West is terrified. I think the Anti-Defamation League is terrified. Because young people, Jewish, Christian, otherwise, are just not buying into the nonsense that the World War II generation and Generation X has sold to them, my generation has sold to them. More power to you, the hope is in you.
Before giving the final word to Lale to answer the last questions or whatever comments she wants to conclude with, I wanted to do a round of thank yous for all the incredible people that allowed us to put this event together. All my colleagues at the Department of International Development, thank you so much. And I want to say thank you, not just because you helped with this event, but because since the beginning of this genocide, all of you have turned to me, asked how I've been doing and how you can help, and that has really meant the world to me. Thank you. I want to thank the AV department, security at King's Events for helping us to go through all of the processes for this event, and of course, the SGA comms team for helping us to put the website together and put all the registrations together. There have been wonderful colleagues across the campus that have helped us to make this event happen, and I really want to thank them, and I hope this is the beginning of many, many more events. I hope that all of you go out of this event and put forward forms to host other Palestine events, because I think this should be the next step to go out of this not being silenced. And Lale, I'll leave the last word to you.
Since this is an event for Palestine, the last word should go to a Palestinian. So I'm going to read Mahmoud Darwish's "Where Should the Birds Fly After the Last Sky?" The earth is closing in on us, pushing us through the last passage as we tear off our limbs to pass through. The earth is squeezing us. I wish we were its wheat so we could die and live again. I wish the earth was our mother so she'd be kind to us. I wish we were pictures on the rocks for our dreams to carry as mirrors. We saw the faces of those who will throw our children out of the window of this last space. Our stars will hang up mirrors. Where should we go after the last frontiers? Where should the birds fly after the last sky? Where should the plants sleep after the last breath of air? We will write our names with scarlet's theme. We will cut off the hands of the song to be finished by our flesh. We will die here, here in the last passage. Here and here our blood will plant its olive tree. And good night.
Just to say, we're organising an event on Monday, so do you want to say something about it?
So we have, just before you go, we have an event on Monday, and it's about kind of knowledge production and Palestine, and we have a photographer coming. So please come. It's going to be in Waterloo, around 4:30, room FWB 1.17. Thank you, guys.